What's up, YouTube? Homegrown Big coming at you again with another science video. This is the one on the microbiome that I mentioned in a previous video. I'm really excited to get this video out there and to have it become part of the discussion on human evolution, diet and nutrition, and physiological performance and/or health. This is a conversation I rarely hear brought up, and it's one that I think will change the way we think about nutrition, our genetics, and our capacity to handle any particular given diet. In the past, human evolution studies have largely focused on mitochondrial and nuclear genetics research, largely because it was too complicated to really start to characterize human microbiomes, and that was a result of not having the kind of technology that we have now to explore molecular genetics. This goes a bit further into our understanding of evolution and how we and other living creatures, including plants, use microbiomes to rapidly adjust to changing conditions. And if you think about it on an evolutionary level, the generation time for microbes is extremely fast, and they can mutate and come up with creative solutions to symbiotic relationships that would take way, way, way longer for humans because we have such slow generation times. So, and that's the same for other species as well. So we have very sophisticated communication mechanisms, receptors. The microbiome even talks to our entire nervous system, and I'll get into that a little bit further into this discussion. But we use microbes to help us adapt and respond to our environment. And this has been going on for a very long time, and we can tell through molecular genetics certain microbes that we are starting to incorporate into our own multicellular unit. And I'm not going to get into that science today, but it's very interesting how we can discern how long we've had an evolutionary relationship with a particular species or taxa based on their genetics and our genetics. So keep that in mind, and we'll get into this paper now. Okay, so let's talk about microbiome and expand our thinking on it a little bit and maybe have some better defining cross sections. So a lot of people, when they hear microbiome, I think only think of their gut flora. But we know that that's not the case. It's everything on the outside from your head down to your toes and all the inside stuff. And it can mean different things. It can be transient. For example, men with beards hold microbiomes in their beards that have been shown to help with immunity. So, those are just some points to consider there. How do we get our microbiome? What is the sort of the core fundamental microbiome, and then what is transient? So there are two ways that we transfer microbiome. One is a horizontal transfer and one is a vertical. And in horizontal transfer, it happens in this generation, so it can be from a partner, it could be from even coworkers, it could be from your environment, where you live in a city versus urban versus all this kind of stuff can influence those sort of horizontal microbe transfers. And that's actually one way that they think that antibiotic resistant strains are actually transferred from one human to another. So that's off topic, but I thought that was a really interesting point. Vertical transfer is probably our most important thing that we need to talk about and consider for this particular paper. Vertical transfer comes from mother to newborn child. They have shown through research that the microbiome of a child that is birthed naturally through the vagina is radically different than those that are born via C-section. Human placenta holds a really specific microbiome that aids in developing newborn children. Even more over that, there's microbiomes on breast tissue that help newborns inoculate with microbes that will aid in digesting milk. In mother's milk specifically, there's saccharides that help establish gut microbes in the gut. So all of these are super important, especially if you consider like the trend that there was for a long time of not breastfeeding children, but I think that that's coming back around. All of these things can kind of radically alter when we've deviated from our sort of natural animal mechanisms and moved into, humanistic sterilization. We've, through that, really altered newborn children and the kind of microbiomes they have in them. And this could be actually a huge part of some of the mental health issues that we're having globally. Okay, moving on from baby with mother's milk just birthed, a small human will go through a series of microbial successions that reflect the dietary changes and moving into solid foods. And then at that point, the microbiome sort of profiles a regular adult. This is really interesting to me, and I will be excited to revisit this sometime later because the science is still pretty new on this. But we know that a number of species do what's called diet imprinting, and that happens not only with their genes but with their microbiome. So it could be their epigenetic markers with their microbiome, and what happens is they have their mother in their environment, and they make sort of permanent adaptations to that diet in their environment, and when you try to change that on them, they do very poorly because they're not adapted to those changes. Now, we know humans are highly plastic in many ways, and we are highly adaptable. So the likelihood that we imprint 100% on any diet is probably not likely, but there could very well be a core imprinting around certain physiological features. We don't know yet. The science is still developing. So beyond just the microbiome that the mother passes on, or the horizontal transfer from the environment and the introduction of solid foods, there's more to it than just that. There's genotype influences and associations. So this is where, again, I'm going to come back to this whole thing of people making claims that one diet will suit all humans falls to pieces. Whether it's vegan, whether it's carnivore, doesn't matter. One diet will not suit the entire human species. That's just a fact. But getting back to this genotype, they've shown that this particular genotypes with the FUT2 gene, if they are a non-secretor, then there's a very slow or not establishing this particular strain of bacteria. And this particular strain of bacteria helps the newborn digest mother's milk, and it also plays a critical role in the infant health by regulating gut permeability and reducing inflammation. So already right there, we're seeing how genotype can influence your capacity to digest milk. And I think that they'll find as they go on in this research that there's more genotypes that control the types of microbiomes you have and what that can mean for nutrition, including like vitamin conversion and, dealing with gluten and all of these kind of, dealing with fiber even, all these kind of things. So hold on to that. Let's keep going. Okay, so one of the best ways to start to understand new emerging data is to put it into context. And do comparison and contrast. And that really helps us understand it in our brain better, right? So one of the beautiful things that this research did that I absolutely love and feel that should be expanded on in the future is they compared microbiomes of urban people in the United States and Italy, so Western diets versus Western, like European diets, so probably a bit more traditional food, to people living rurally in Venezuela, Peru, and then Southeast Africa. And those people in the rural areas were living largely on subsistence existence still, so growing their own foods, raising their own animals, hunting, gathering. These were still in their daily lives versus the Westerners. And then they also compared that to African apes and ancestors that are closest to us as humans. And this is a critical area that I think anybody who wants to make the claim that we should eat like apes because they're our nearest living ancestors should look at very carefully. Let's take a look at their findings. So look at these findings, so fascinating. Some of them were similar to what I would have thought. The urban dwellers had pretty different microbiomes from the rural dwellers, and although there was a broad range in the rural dwellers, that could be accredited to a lot of things from regionalism, from diet, and also genetics, as we learned about differences in genotypes. And what was interesting is that the urban dwellers had fairly homogenized microbiomes. And what does that really say about modern living? Is that healthy? Probably not. Are we too sterile in our urban areas? Are we too sterile in our birthing centers? Are we eating too much of a homogenized diet? Are we not getting out in nature enough? Are we not playing in the dirt enough? We know for a fact that people who garden, who grow their own food, have different microbiomes that help them in their health. And so many people don't produce their own foods. But probably one of the most interesting parts of their findings here was how radically, and I mean radically different, the human microbiomes are to our next living kin. The chimps and bonobos, they found, had fairly similar microbiomes, but they found that the gorillas were really different than the chimps and the bonobos. And that only makes sense if you consider the fact that chimps and bonobos are frugivores who are opportunistic omnivores, and for people who want to get pedantic, frugivorism is actually a subcategory of omnivorism, so all frugivores are actually omnivores. And gorillas really focus on greens, and their colons have to do a huge amount of fermenting, so they probably have very specialized fermenting microbiomes. So pretty interesting stuff. I think it says a lot about what we evolved from and maybe how we're moving towards something that's not, obviously supporting our health. And let's keep talking about their other findings. All right, let's read what they say about digestion and metabolism. To put things in context, I think that it's plausible that sometimes when we say, like, this person or that person doesn't make the vitamin conversion or doesn't have the genetics to do something, we could in fact be talking about a microbiome. And I've never heard anybody make that argument. So let's read a little bit about what they say. The success of the genus Homo was aided by progressive advancements in tool and cooking technologies, which likely contributed to our relatively reduced, unspecialized digestive physiology. Yet, through evolution, we have acquired increase in energy throughput relative to the other great apes, and simultaneously imposed stringent nutritional demands to support our reproduction and brain function. These evolutionary processes did not exclude the microbiome, as anatomical and physiological variations overwhelmingly defined its taxonomic and gene composition. This ostensibly says that our microbiome reflects our changes in diet. And the fact that our microbiome is so different than our relatives, to me, is highly indicative that our diets should not be exactly like our relatives. They go on to say, microbiota play an important role in nutritional buffering. Many recent studies lend evidence to oral and gut microbiome function in human nutrition, including key roles in nutrient and vitamin synthesis, xenobiotic and secondary bioactive compound metabolism, gluconeogenesis, and digestion of refractory compounds such as polysaccharides, gluten, and lactose. In addition, humans are able to take advantage of a wide range of microbial assisted and fermented foods, in part because of enhanced capacity to digest ethanol in the hominid lineage, and as such, microbes can be viewed as important players in recent human events, such as the rise of grain-based agriculture, the spread of human genetic variants that facilitate lactose tolerance in dairy. Gluten-degrading microorganisms are found in the human oral and gut microbes, but their role in digesting gluten-containing grains is not well understood. Comparative studies of gluten-degrading microorganisms in diverse populations with and without grain-based agriculture may yield valuable information about the role of gluten and gluten digestion microbes in the human microbiome. Again, here we're hearing a case for a wide variety in human microbiomes that are transferred to you by your mother. Maybe you can get them horizontally in some way from your environment, but you may or may not have the kind of microbiome that assists in degrading certain foods that might help you with biosynthesis of precursors or change vitamins like K1 to K2, for example. So this is all critically important. So let's move on to the central nervous system. Okay, so let's see what they say here about brain growth and development and behavior. Recent research on brain development and social interaction in both humans and animal models have revealed that microbes exert a major impact on cognitive function and behavioral patterns. For example, growing consensus recognizes that cognitive and behavioral issues are often co-expressed with functional bowel disorders. The enteric environment is considered a third arm of the autonomic nervous system, and gut microbes produce more than 90% of the body's serotonin. What? That's the first time I've heard that. That's really interesting. Factors critical to learning and plasticity, such as serotonin and GABA, short-chain fatty acids, and brain-derived neurotropic factors, which train the amygdalin and hippocampal activity, can be mediated through gut-brain chemical signals that cross-activate bacterial and host receptors. Wow. Okay, they go on to talk about childhood rearing. I got to skip over part of this so we don't have a 40-minute video, but they wrap that up by saying, therefore, quintessentially human behavior phenotypes in stress, anxiety, and novelty seeking is additionally reinforced by microbial production of neuroactive compounds. As neurological research expands to include the microbiome, it is increasingly clear that host microbe interactions have likely played an important role in human brain evolution and development. And I would say for anybody who has been on any particular diet where they've noticed a huge change in their depression, anxiety, stress, or anger, and I'm not pointing fingers, but I've heard a lot of stories, you might consider how your microbiome changes with what you are feeding it. All very interesting stuff. I think that it sheds a lot of light onto how somebody who comes from a certain genotype or regionalism may not make the vitamin conversions necessary on a particular diet like plant-based, where they might not have or sustain the microbiome necessary to convert K1 to K2. I think it says a lot for people who go on plant-based diets who suddenly have huge issues with anxiety, depression, anger, stress. These are commonly reported. I think this gives us some ideas as to why some people can't tolerate dairy, can't tolerate gluten. I think it also gives us some ideas why people who may not start their lives in a very well supported way, like they might come from a family where the mother, for whatever reason, couldn't breastfeed, and then maybe their childhood diet wasn't very diverse. Maybe they were stuck in an inner city where they weren't given any exposure to nature or dirt, and how that can impact their health and their diet later on in life. There's so much here to contemplate, more than this video really can cover. And again, this is not comprehensive, I'm just looking at one paper here for the purpose of discussion. And I think it also, I will wrap this up with giving us some ideas for treatments as well. I know I've read a little bit about microbiome transplants, and it's kind of fringe medicine, but it's gaining some strength, and there's a number of stories of people who've been healed from this. So taking a microbiome from somebody who's very robust, somebody who's able to, digest everything well, has good high health, and transplant it into somebody who's having like autoimmune disease or really severe digestive issues, and they see that their health changes. And this may hold some key for some future really inspired vegan scientist who can create the perfect human microbiome transplant to help others be successful vegans. It could happen. That said, let me know your thoughts, ideas, additional information in the comments below. Hit thumbs. More to come. I'm working on a collaboration with a biology professor right now. We're working on some videos for cholesterol, and I've got a couple of other things coming up too that I don't want to get into this particular video. But we'll see you next time.